there's like a pile of the Bruin Standard. With the first one, the main headline is "Diversity is the new discrimination." So I don't know if they're designed to they're placed here so that like I can be aware that they're watching me. So if they are on tape, you can watch all you like. I frequently welcome the debate. It's so one of these days the right is going to figure out that if they can't figure out a way to legitimately attract minorities to their ideas, they're going to wander in the wilderness for like the next 40 years. So I'm kind of toggling back and forth between two different lectures here. So we can talk about, we're sort of transitioning into discussions on rap and popular culture. Did any of you guys look at did any of you guys get to see, was it on C-SPAN? I saw clips from it, the State of Black America this past weekend. I sent it out. So right now, Tavis Smiley is going around demanding accountability from black leadership, and he has a picture of the president on the cover of his accountability thing, which is frequently not trumpeting an idea, which I think is sort of essential to black political thought if we think about black activism, which is in the past, right, the reasons why popular culture, things like rap music, et cetera, but in particular writers, artists, athletes, et cetera, have been so essential to the development of black politics or black political communication, is that for the vast majority of American history, black actors or black people have not had access to what would understood to be formal political participation, right? You can't elect a congressperson, you can't elect a mayor, you can't elect a senator, you have no access to the franchise. It means that people who have to the public sphere, or to be able to speak to the public, ability to speak for the community. So in that sense, while we think about popular culture is always having political messages in some central sense. In the case of African-American discourse communities for a long part of history, the sort of expectations or the kind of publicity offered to black actors in the cultural realm has frequently made up for or been given, or they've been given a responsibility to speak for a community that does politically speak for a community that does not have representation in the political world. So if we think about the sort of symbolic importance of, say, for instance, boxers like Jack Johnson, the first black heavyweight champion of the world, or later on Joe Louis, or the political importance assigned to someone like Jackie Robinson, we can think about that is balanced off by the lack of political representation elsewhere. We can think about as well the uses and extension of politics and popular culture and music expressed in blues songs and other places, right? Both in terms of those songs and their slave traditions had ways of communicating both sort of secret and overt messages, challenge and power, but also at the same time, those kinds of cultural products became ways to communicate political sensibility. So you had things like the Black Arts Movement or the the bebop movement in terms of expressing things like I talked about last time, like Charlie Parker's song "Now's the Time," referring to the need to move towards civil rights or human rights. We've also had there've also been a sort of series. So in many cases, right, in some ways, we may be in a moment where this is being destabilized in an interesting way now that there is such prominent black leadership on the national stage that also in the guise of President Obama, who cuts across, seemingly cuts across both the sort of political world and the realm of popular culture, right? Note the T-shirts, the music, etc., who sort of effectively combines those two black political realms. But in the past, you often had these kinds of things which were about, what I call sort of Oprah Winfrey come save me politics, right? Or the kind of complaints about Michael Jordan wasn't overtly political enough when he was at the height of his powers, that Michael Jordan didn't speak out enough about sort of racial issues or the situation of black people in America or a range of other issues. And the question would be, obviously, is that Michael Jordan was a basketball player, right? What about being a basketball player qualifies him or would qualify him to speak out about social and political issues? But the issue is that, in fact, what it was is a part of that particular legacy of African Americans being shut out of the public sphere, unable to get media attention, to speak in public, access, and to have sort of legitimate political leadership, meant that in some ways there's a kind of residual thing in which people still look to actors like athletes and entertainers for these kinds of political messages, and feel that they have some particular responsibility. Michael Jordan actually didn't actually say much in public about his own politics, but actually he was actually, in terms of a lot of the things he did, he's actually quite political. He regularly gave large sums of money to political candidates. He was widely criticized, though he didn't make a public comment about it, for when the Bulls won 2 championships while George H.W. Bush was in the White House. Michael Jordan was busy, as he stated, and did not attend. And he didn't attend until Bill Clinton was in the White House. It was a kind of clear message, which he was saying. He later on gave money to Bill Bradley and a range of other people. Helped Spike Lee, Oprah Winfrey and Michael Jordan helped Spike Lee produce the film that you guys saw, Malcolm X. They provided him with a substantial part of the cash to produce the film. And so in some ways, someone like Jordan was trying to, I haven't been one of the people that was sort of most critical of Michael Jordan, not just because I'm a Bulls fan, who's from the south side of Chicago, but also because I felt like the way in which he handled himself was in part a kind of needed maturing in black politics, which is, what about being someone who can shoot a fadeaway jump shot qualifies one to comment on political or social issues? Not that he doesn't necessarily have political or social beliefs, but that he isn't in any way or should not be considered in any way a black leader, right? There's nothing about his athletic talents, his ability, or even his marketability that qualifies him to do so, nor why should we expect him to. That is, and oftentimes the fact that he didn't say much, people assumed that he was either apolitical or had some sort of conservative politics that was somehow at odds with the majority of the black community, which actually turns out to be not the case, or that he represented some particular lack of courage. In some ways, I think Michael Jordan was saying, I'm a basketball player. I might choose to have some political life, but to the extent in which he used his guise as a basketball player to make those kinds of statements, Michael Jordan came up in an era where, when Michael Jordan started, when he started at the Chicago Bulls, there were 2 black mayors of Chicago. Chicago had legitimate elected black political leadership to speak about the issues related to black people. Michael Jordan wasn't necessarily that guy. Of course he did the as best he could, some representation of role models. So at the same time, I guess this is all to say that the African American community lives with this sort of weird dichotomy in this old history of not having access to and having people like writers, poets, athletes, entertainers, being sort of racial spokespeople. And in that sense, just as I saw you, hip hop culture and rap music in particular for youth, became a kind of central area or central mode of political communication, somewhat in that old tradition, but also forging traditions in its own, in which hip-hop artists were seen to be central political actors. And people talk about hip-hop politics or the hip-hop movement that seems to cross beyond it being a sort of artistic or cultural movement, but to suggest that there's something overtly political. And so in many cases, the sets of sort of debates around this have been interesting. And what I'm trying to sort of frame is the ways in which these actors are given or granted a set of legitimacy that in some way seems at odds with either their responsibility, their training, or the kind of consistent ways in which we might think of leadership. They're not elected by anybody, right? While Tavis Smiley goes around talking about accountability for Barack Obama, there's only one person who will ever appear on a ballot. He's not accountable to anyone but the people at PBS and perhaps Mark who sponsors the show. He's gonna come and knock on my door. But the point is that you have this sort of dueling traditions of which, and in some ways it gets distorted in that people who hold themselves out, who aren't accountable or elected or placed in those positions by anyone, frequently hold themselves out to somehow be sort of more authentic, more accountable, more the sort of legitimate spokesperson than the actual people who are the elected representatives of the black community as a whole. And so hence Tavis Smiley's going to go around the country doing an accountability tour with a picture of Barack Obama on the cover of the book, suggesting that he needs to be held accountable by Tavis Smiley, who, to my knowledge, is not held accountable to anyone. And at the same time, I mean, I think there's a kind of allure as well by, certain groups of intellectuals to suggest that in some ways, rather than simply providing analysis or a kind of thoughtful sense, that we are sort of speaking for the black community as a whole in some sense, and we're not. No one elects me to be professor of UCLA. I didn't get the job by election. I'm not responsible to anybody but myself or the institution in some senses, and that gives me academic freedom. And I'm not accountable to anyone in some senses, right? I mean, there's no mechanism through which if I sort of failed. In fact, the mechanism is conditioned by tenure. Works completely the opposite way. I can say all kinds of crazy things, and not suffer any necessarily consequences for them in a way that elected accountable leadership can't. So on the flip side of that has been frequently by certain youth culture, but as well as the sort of the mainstream media and others, has been the elevation, but also the sort of stated expression of hip hop artists that. It's almost hard for them to say that they're in any sense of speaking for a generation, because it's now been about 3 generations of hip hop artists, right? Too Short retired a few years ago. Like, what does that mean to I'm a hip hop artist and I've retired, right? BB King is still playing. I mean, he's 80 years old, but so Too Short retired. So at least there's been some sort of evolution in terms of hip hop, but there's been a sense of that hip-hop artists have held themselves out to kind of, at least, and to use the term specifically, to represent, right? To represent the voice of their generation, to represent something that's real, to represent something that is authentic in Black America, somewhat in terms of disregard to the fact that hip-hop itself is produced, managed, circulated by major multinational corporations most of the people in charge are not people of African descent. And it has its own, I mean, not that matters. It could still in some ways be a sort of authentic voice. And that hip hop artists frequently aren't responsible to anyone except for their A&R people and the people at the record company who they owe money to for what they produce. And in some ways, again, we find ourselves in that dichotomy, but at the same time, we can't say that there's entirely nothing to it. So we can't say that there's nothing to the idea that Jackie Robinson or people had a certain attachment, or that it has a certain kind of effect, the kind of messages that hip hop is presenting to people. And then in that sense, if we understand those messages to be in some ways political messages, then in some ways we do have to discuss, or it's worth discussing or viewing or discussing their particular content. And in some ways, the particular set of debates about whether or not rap is political, it sort of obviously is, in that either they're communicating a series of ideas about the good life, they're describing conditions in black communities, they're suggesting what behaviors one ought to engage in order to either ameliorate or change either the conditions in the community more broadly or your individual conditions, right? What is the philosophy of 50 Cent? Get rich or die trying, right? That is a philosophy that's being communicated to people. So in many senses, right, hip hop is a kind of political actor, one that this lecture may become anachronistic. It may be rendered quaint in terms of really thinking about hip hop politics or the kind of elevation. There was at one point, to push you in the late 80s, there was at one point where people believed that if there were going to be a new movement of the equivalent of the civil rights movement, that it would emerge out of the music that we understand to be hip hop. And hip hop culture, that it was going to galvanize the youth. And I'm actually going to try and see if I can manage to get online enough to pull off a couple of clips for you. And that was the sort of height of political hip hop occurs in particular in terms of, especially you see this in your Dawson textbook, that hip hop most clearly and consistently articulates. Had at times in its political guises articulated a black nationalist perspective, whether it be cultural nationalist or some version of a kind of revolutionary nationalist perspective. Not ironically, right? Tupac Shakur is the son of an ex-Black Panther. Nas's father was a jazz musician. Known for his political and sort of Afrocentric approach, but in some ways, some of that is that kind of the hip hop of Nas and Tupac, maybe necessarily not Tupac in his day, but particularly of Nas now, operates on the fringes of the hip hop movement, where the center is shifted. Whereas I would say between sort of 1987 and about 1991, political hip hop, or hip hop whose central sort of message was one of politics, represented the kind of central. I was going to try and show you guys some old Public Enemy videos, and there's a series. One of the arguments is that there's a series of groups or voices that sort of galvanize that. In particular, I think probably the strongest voice was Public Enemy with their album. It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back, and then Fear of a Black Planet. Those articles galvanized a sort of black nationalist ethos as well as a kind of Afrocentric ethos that was sweeping college campuses in the late 80s and early 90s, and attracting, in part, was a kind of neo either / cultural or revolutionary nationalist discussion, here we go, though still slow, that emerged in order to attempt to try and galvanize black perspectives, and in particular Public Enemy under the guise of particularly Chuck D, as well as their sort of intellectual and spiritual advisor, Professor Griff. Not so much Flavor Flav, he was always kind of just simply a hype man, attempted to address, both sort of issues within the context of the black community, but pose political solutions. So I'm going to try and, if this ever spools up, show you two groups. One group, Public Enemy, who takes a kind of explicitly sort of revolutionary nationalist perspective, both in sort of style and substance, even if you think about how they dress. And an alternative group, which was a group by the name of X-Clan, who articulated a distinctively cultural nationalist perspective. One thing that's also clear about hip hop, early hip hop is sort of party hip hop, and so there's sort of two connected things. Is that another aspect of hip hop is that a principle, and this in part connects to the, maybe I can get a better angle if I move over here. One of the principal preoccupations with hip hop, both in its sort of nationalist guise, but also in its other forms, has been the preoccupation with black masculinity. Hip hop is, well, not hip hop, but rap in particular, but large portions of hip hop culture have been really centrally about articulating, has been a sort of very essentially sort of masculine art involved with articulations of in particular versions and modes of black masculinity from the very beginning, though I'm going to talk a little bit about, so you've had two things going on. So one is both the kind of political trajectory of hip hop in terms of the sort of political messaging, it transitioning from its inception as a kind of party music to then one that sought to describe conditions in and around the ghetto, to moving to not only describing those conditions, but to being prescriptive in some sense, right? With the sort of hip hop of the late 80s, with Public Enemy, Fight the Power, etc., as well as there being sort of different articulations of prescriptions, including ones that sort of tried to emphasize black consciousness through kind of cultural nationalism, like groups like X-Clan. But at the same time, there's also been a consistent message within hip hop that about gender and gender relations. So some of the early hip hop songs were initially sort of party songs, but I could also point to songs that were part of the early hip hop lexicon, like, for instance, the songs by UTFOs, in particular Roxanne's Revenge. These were songs designed around the interplay between men and women, usually in particular. So if we think of the most popular one of UTFO's Roxanne, it's about these three guys who are trying to woo this woman by the name of Roxanne, who they see walking down the street, and they all take their shot and ultimately fail. They conclude that she's stuck up. There were a series of response songs to Roxanne, one by Roxanne Shante, and then another called Roxanne's Revenge, and another one called The Real Roxanne, which is actually in an old tradition of African-American blues music, where frequently either the male or female song that made some sort of challenge or discussed some aspect of gender relations or sexuality, etc., was responded to by the opposite sex, so that there was a kind of banter between the songs. And this is about the sort of interplay of romantic love, etc. One of the things is that as hip-hop adopted a more both sort of political, but as well as sort of black nationalist perspective, one of the things that begins to decline is the degree to which hip hop adopts includes a kind of space for romantic love, or romantic interplay, right? So if we see the Public Enemy thing, there's no space for sort of romance or sexuality or those kinds of interconnections between men or women. It's an extraordinarily masculine sort of presentation. The same thing with sort of X-Clan, as well as sort of rap also began to sort of adopt. And even in the early sort of masculinity, right, the masculinity was expressed through the sort of expression of romantic love with women, or the attempt to sort of woo a woman, which allowed for a certain kind of response. Basically, I don't know if you guys have ever seen, but the real Roxanne, or Roxanne's Revenge, their response was basically that it wasn't that she was stuck up, but it was that the guys were whack, right? And she even actually says that one of them was halfway decent. She goes through all of them and talks about how they're ugly or this or that. And so there's a kind of banter back and forth. Since the sort of advent of kind of black nationalism in sort of hip hop culture, as well as I'll talk about the sort of gangster turn in hip hop, it's been harder to find women's voices, and in particular, it's been harder to find a concept of, or a notion of, relationships between men and women, and I'll sort of explain the sort of transition from that. So at least here's a little bit of kind of message rap. Let's see if we can get this to spool up at all. So you can see there the kind of the 70s costume and kind of sensibility. It's the late 70s, transitioning into the early 80s. But one of the things that they're actually talking about is the kind of political economy of the Reagan era, right? Where there's a substantial divestment in black and urban communities, the deindustrialization of major cities disproportionately affects the economic outcome and view and outlook of black communities. And this is the era pre-crack, right? So crack and the cocaine epidemic has not yet hit black communities, though the conditions that they're rapping about are describing the kind of possibilities, that there's a kind of black community depression, economic depression, that creates the opportunity in the level of misery that the crack epidemic ultimately ends up exploiting. So you can see here, that's still a kind of mix of message rap with party rap. You get groups that begin to sort of tilt much more towards message rap. Eric B. and Rakim, Eric B. for President. One of the initial songs, and others. Then you start to transition into groups like Public Enemy and X-Clan and others. Let's see which one this is. So as the economic decline begins to hit inner cities more profoundly, one other thing that hip hop music builds upon is the decline. This is a cultural nationalist group by the name of X-Clan. It's a song called Funkin' Lesson that kind of picks up on and uses a lot of the signs and symbols of cultural nationalism as a kind of basis for articulating rap. Let's let it spool up. So there's kind of two competing visions that emerge out of kind of message rap. One is a kind of revolutionary nationalist. It's represented by groups like, in particular, Public Enemy, but also there's a cultural nationalist. One of the things is you heard even in Grandmaster Flash, you heard the reference to the woman who used to be a fag hag. One consistent thing throughout hip hop has been constant expressions of different forms and guises of homophobia. Because of the kind of sort of masculinist orientation, even in the much more sort of message hip hop, etc. I'm thinking about groups like Brand Nubian. What is the line from them? I'm not down with gays. I don't understand their ways. You have some of this. I'll show you when we look at. In particular, like in the beginning of Fight the Power, there's a quote, I think it's from Louis Farrakhan, and Farrakhan is saying, he goes and says, "Yet our best trained, best educated, best equipped troops refuse to fight. In fact, it's safe to say that they would rather, and you can't see the video, but he says switch. And he says switch, and he extends it for a long time. And the suggestion is, does anyone know what to switch in the African-American lexicon means? It means to walk by swaying your hips, right, in a sort of feminine way. So the suggestion is that that the sort of educated classes have adopted a kind of, by not sort of becoming more political, more nationalist in their orientation, have become sort of gay in their orientation. That's the sort of beginning of Fight the Power. Here's X-Clan. Had you guys seen that before? So, I mean, clearly, like, right, just, straight out cultural nationalists all the way, Africa, the pyramids, the African dancing, African drummers, garb, a pink Cadillac thrown in just for effect. So you can see the kind of explicitly sort of nationalist. You can also see, the kind of women don't really have a voice, right? They're sort of backgrounded in this particular music. And so here we'll see the kind of the opposite, which is, or the counterpart, not the opposite necessarily, which is also, we're going to take a look at Public Enemy's Night of the Living Bassheads. And this is them commenting, both articulating a kind of black and revolutionary nationalist perspective, but also commenting on race and class and the impact of the drug epidemic on the community, but also on the nation of whole. And its disproportionate impact on black communities. Let me pause for a second while it spools up. Any questions about the X-Clan video? So that was popular. Yeah, go ahead.
I noticed that a lot of because I didn't realize that the chorus in that song, it's been reproduced, it's been covered by other bands. You just assume that these new bands are coming up with these.
Well, you know what that originally is, right? That's George Clinton. Right, that's Parliament, Funkadelic. I remember when my cousin first got that album and he played it for me. Yeah, One Nation Under a Groove, getting down just for the funk of it. That's George Clinton's Parliament. So they didn't even make it up. So yeah, I mean, a lot of the stuff from George Clinton, the Ohio Players, and, in particular sort of funk music, as well as a lot of stuff he gets used from James Brown, right? James Brown had, Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. Of course, James Brown also had, what's his gender song? Besides Hot Pants. It's a man's world. But it wouldn't be nothing without a woman or a girl, but man make the electric light, right? So in fact, right, James Brown is arguing for a kind of complementarity that's very similar to Asante and others. So in fact, right, the sort of background music in hip hop in particular, the kind of funk of the sort of late 70s, and in particular George Clinton's Parliament, who came up with great songs like that, One Nation Under a Groove, getting down just for the funk of it, articulating a kind of sense of sort of politics and party in the same space, as well as, one of my favorites this last year was George Clinton's Paint the White House Black, that he came up with. Here is actually sort of Night of the Living Bassheads with Public Enemy commenting on a thing. And also, one of the things that's really interesting is that Public Enemy connected up in a kind of, traditional, in a sort of very strong connection with the kind of tradition of revolutionary nationalists. A lot of a lot of Public Enemy's background music doesn't come out of, in particular, funk or James Brown or sort of black musical traditions. They hooked up with groups like Anthrax, and used the sort of harshness of in particular what a kind of rock metal sound frequently to kind of emphasize the sort of urgency and power. And that's again kind of almost sort of typical of a kind of revolutionary nationalist ethos. They're willing to make alliances with kind of whites who have similar kinds of perspectives. So one of the things that's going on is that, just to stop, so where's the Audubon Ballroom where they're marching initially? Do you know what the cultural significance of that place is? That's where Malcolm X is assassinated, right, in Harlem. One of the other things is that they're trying to pull in. You can hear the musical difference, right? Some of the different music, the kind of use of things. And another thing that's going on is that Public Enemy. You saw the different stylistic representation, right? Look very sort of Black Panther-esque, the berets, the whole thing. So right around the time when Public Enemy is coming along is when you begin to start to get the first grumblings that hip hop may be something dangerous, that hip hop may be a music that's sort of spurring Black youth to kind of nihilistic rage. Etc. And Public Enemy is picking up on that. I don't know. You guys saw the sign in the back. Elvis lives, right? You know, and if you listen to the song "Fight the Power," right? There's the chorus that goes, "Elvis was a hero the most, but he never mentioned to me because he's straight up racist. The sucker was simple and plain." And John Wayne, because I'm Black and I'm proud. Basically, I'm hyped and I'm at. Most of my heroes don't appear on no stamp. All you'll see is rednecks for 400 years if you check, right? So in fact, you know, that whole line is about the kind of distance between hip hop and sort of signs of the American nation, the role of sort of Elvis as a kind of cultural icon, and you know, being a kind of southern white man. And then he goes to the next line is, "Don't worry, be happy" was the #1 jam. You know, and then he says, "You can slap me right here if I say it," because the idea is that nothing's good is going on. We need to be activists in the context, and that's a Fight the Power, which became the sort of central sort of song or touchstone for Spike Lee's one of Spike Lee's greatest films, Do the Right Thing. Here we go. We should have spooled up. We can catch more of the brown bags. So let me see if I can let it spool up a little bit. So here actually you see the in particular that line is very critical. Shame on a brother when he's dealing, right? So in some sense, right, the later on, and we'll talk about the transition to gangster rap, right? Here it's very explicit, right? Dealing is harming the Black community, is serving the interests of the powerful. Dealing is also, right, you know, who else is using drugs? White people on Wall Street, right? Wealthy white people are using drugs. So drugs is a sign of corruption, decadence. Dealing is something that is destructive to the Black community. And it's sort of a non-sanctioned activity in the context of Public Enemy's perspective. Any question about Public Enemy? Yeah.
Who was the record, or what was the record company?
Def Jam.
Def Jam that put it out. And so who headed Def Jam at that time?
Rick Rubin and Russell Simmons.
Okay.
Why?
Because if the main critique nowadays is that, when they have the hip hop forum, Nelly was saying, I'm producing conscious rap, but it's not being played because they're taking my commercial songs and playing them. And then the critique was that, the people who are executives who are putting this out are white men. And so I'm thinking about.
Well, Rick Rubin is white. You didn't know that? Yeah, Rick Rubin is a Jewish guy. One of the central who founded Def Jam with Russell Simmons. It's Rick and Russell. But this is before. I mean, rap had not yet become big, major corporate business, right? Def Jam was still relatively independent, was operating in what was perceived to be a niche market, doing stuff. There wasn't this idea that it would be sort of broadly commercial. At the same time as this is emerging, you start to get a much more, as the sort of masculinity in hip hop emerges, you start to get a much more sort of coarse language in reference to women, right? Sometimes comes with the kind of black nationalist ethos. And even though there you saw the beginnings of some of the first female rappers, you saw MC Lyte, who appeared, who was also on the early Def Jam label. You know, I'm the Light of the Rock, a cup of cappuccino is one of her better songs. Extraordinarily talented rapper. You begin to see references to women become less sort of about banter, but more representative of a kind of corrupted in the black community, in particular black women. And you start to get the terms, you know, bitch, et cetera, start to creep in, as well as the crack epidemic begins to cast women as the quote-unquote crack hoe, right? The relationship between women become, with women. Women are sort of corrupted by drugs, and then only into sort of goods. At the same time, you get artists like Queen Latifah, who comes along with a kind of black nationalist perspective, but in particular from a kind of gendered women's perspective. He attempts to sort of redefine with songs like Ladies First, where she's explicitly in kind of black nationalist guard, and others where she takes a kind of black nationalist, articulates it for a woman. Yeah. Yeah, that's in reference to Malcolm X. So in some ways, right, you have the two, you know, as I argued before, the two branches of Malcolm X, right? Malcolm X is the spiritual leader of kind of both ways of thinking in some ways. So here's Queen Latifah, actually. Let's see if she'll spool up. And this is actually some of her later work. Some of her early work was actually a little more explicitly black nationalist in its orientation. In terms of the kind of garb that she wore, the sort of big hats, etc. This is before she made family movies where her principal aim was to be the sort of maid who comes along and helps white men. So she might get mad at me too, right? So there's no unity in the black community absent that. She's taking a sort of an explicitly kind of much more sort of black feminist line, connected with sort of a kind of critique of nationalism in this particular song. So let's see, it's sort of spooling up. Sometimes it speeds up when I turn it on. So let's see if it does that. Yeah, it's spooling up now. We'll give it a couple more seconds. So this is Queen Latifah, you know, presenting her kind of critique of the direction that hip hop and hip hop culture is going, and then posing a different basis, and including one that allows for gender equity, for the basis of unity within the black community. Let's pause for a second. So what's the basis? You know which group he's from, right? Naughty by Nature, right? Yeah. So this is kind of early 90s. So unity, and this is about sort of mutual respect, a sense that, you know, women have to be respected in all things. What other image does she include in this video that we don't see in a lot of the others? Pardon me? We see children, right? Children are featured kind of early on. The sort of, you know, there's a very sort of black feminist take, right? Which, in even the imagery, right? The community is a holistic place, right? It's not just the place of, you know, masculine, of masculine activism, of emphasis. The community is encompassed by by the fact that often black women are caretakers of black children, both male and female. And it's a way to, the injection in particular, the children in this video, is a way to kind of complicate the kind of negative messages posed about women and their kind of effects. It sort of brings it to light in a very critical and forceful way. And this is sort of, again, sort of Queen Latifah's sort of critiquing, explaining this sort of black national stuff. We're beginning to critique what we're going to transition into, which is the kind of the gangster rap perspective. So let's see if it spools up a little bit. We're sort of struggling with our connection again. Any questions about this video? Comments? You can see the imagery is very different, right? Imagery, women on motorcycles. They don't have to be provocatively dressed, but she's also saying, like, look, I should be able to wear my cutoffs and be able to walk down the street unmolested in the context of the black community. She's staking out a certain particular ground or a marker about what constitutes respect in the context of black communities and black discourse. Right. Also, don't call me out of my name. You need to refer to me as who I am, rather than these kinds of terms. And she's also, who else is the audience for this? Yeah, go ahead.
I thought it was interesting that she was like, she's speaking out to black women.
Right, that's the other thing, is that she's also speaking, you're not a bitch nor a hoe. She's also calling on black women not to accept that particular kind of treatment or discussion of them. Yeah.
Earlier when she was on the little rail, she told them it's okay. Yeah, I understand we're joking or we're a kickback. And you call me that, okay? But she said when you call me out my name, referring to like, hey, that's not cool.
Yeah. So she's drawing boundaries in some ways in terms of around the language. Yeah.
Was there a backlash?
No, I don't think so. I mean,
It was pretty well received.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was just kind of the thing that Queen Latifah did. And it was a sort of like, there's been a space for these kinds of expressions. I mean, they're actually, right, an image of, domestic violence, right, in the context of the car. But I don't think there was any sort of explicit, there wasn't even actually necessarily a response song to this. And actually, it was actually sort of universally, because that line, the UNITY and the saxophone, was like kind of really fly at the time. Like it was kind of right where everything was. But at the same time, right, like this song didn't become the kind of critical ethos that defined the hip hop community. It was like, okay, yeah, Queen Latifah does that sort of thing over there for the ladies, and it's kind of cool, and they listen to that and that kind of thing. But then the real hip hop is over here, right, which sort of maintained its kind of masculine perspective. But then also, right, if you think about it, yeah, go ahead.
Why do you think that is? Do you think that black men just thought, well, she's just pointing out problems of black women, not black community in general? Or was it because...
No, this was one song, and there were 50 calling women bitches and hoes that came out. That were also, and also think about it, like okay, so right now, let's take this image right here. What is her sort of presentation right here, actually, in terms of how she's interacting? This is a traditionally kind of masculine presentation, right? And in some ways, I think, in some ways, some of the kind of, creeping homophobia within the kind of hip hop community, et cetera, was able to kind of dismiss Queen Latifah as being a sort of masculine woman, right? Oh, okay, so Queen Latifah, this is what sort of masculine women say, right? This isn't, she doesn't have what is a kind of traditionally perceived to be feminine self-presentation, which some people have sort of argued, what does a feminine self-presentation look like in the culture of hip hop, right? Where's the space for it? Because so much of the ethos and culture is so wrapped around presenting a hard image, being overtly masculine. And in some of the responses that the feminine self-presentation ends up looking like later on, it ends up looking like the woman in the strip club, right? That's completely bent around the male gaze. So you get Little Kim, Foxy Brown, etc. So there's a sort of complicated nature, both in terms of the hyper-masculinity of hip hop creates in terms also problems for how do we consider feminine self-presentation in the context of hip hop culture. So in the end, I mean, most of it goes on much the same way, but she in that segment she has to make the decision to be a single mom, right? Yeah, go ahead.
I just had a question about the setting of the video.
Okay.
Is it a construction zone or something? I mean, that's what I got from reading.
Yeah, it's definitely sort of urban setting. There's different like construction zones. There's cranes, right? She's going up and down. Yeah, and again, you get a little bit of this sort of masculine self-presentation. But also, again, like even in the domestic violence scene in the car, we glimpse an image of the child, and she even says, you know, you don't want your children to see me getting beat, right? You know, I don't want them to see that. I'm leaving you. I'm making the decision to go out on my own. So she's framing the kinds of choices that black women make to be single moms in the context of domestic violence and things like that. Yeah.
In the beginning, you had said it was kind of a community-oriented community, and I'm just wondering, just from seeing it, do you think it's possibly more women community as opposed to the whole men and women coming together? It just seems like it's like, hey, women, we gotta come together, be strong together, otherwise.
But a significant amount of her message, though, is there's a double message. One is directed at men. Like when she's on the phone, she's talking to her man and she's defining what his behavior ought to be towards the family. So in some ways, so unity is about men and women coming together, but coming together in a sense that sort of deals with the problem of sexism in the community as a kind of central problem in all of its presentations, whether it be the coarse language, whether it be domestic violence, whether it be a range of those different things, or other sort of modes of lack of respect that might occur on the street to women. And she's talking about the sort of overall consequences. She's projecting it out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up on Thursday with Hip Hop Goes to the West Coast. And in particular, right, so if we sort of think about Malcolm X's life, which you sort of saw in sort of a truncated version, right, there's sort of been two aspects of thinking about sort of black cultural resistance to racial oppression. And sort of one option is the race man, right? And I particularly say race man, but race woman. That is the person who overtly challenges the racist system. Through sort of political activity, who's political conscious. What's the other option? The hustler, right? The hustler is not an establishment character. The hustler is distinctively anti-establishment. But the hustler uses the system and the corruption of the system to individually get ahead. And sometimes at the expense. And so there's always been this kind of dichotomy. And in particular, if we think about the you know, at the height of political activity, we've often had these responses that emphasize one or the other, or in some ways you have people like Tupac Shakur who tried to sort of unify. All of a sudden it just pops up. Trying to unify the two. So what we'll do is we'll come out to the West Coast and pick up with what I saw as an overt reaction to the sort of pro-race conscious hip hop of of Public Enemy in the guise of NWA. Thanks, I'll see you guys on Thursday. favorites. One of the things is that there's also been a kind of dissonant narrative that in some ways, in a kind of problematic way, attempts to kind of recast hip hop in a feminine guise, and even the history of hip hop as a kind of love story. And I'm looking here for a video by one of the more conscious rappers who actually comes out of my hometown, Chicago. Let's see if it spools up. Common. The song, is anybody familiar with the song, I Used to Love Her? And it's a song that attempts to tell the story of hip hop, but the story of hip hop is not about the music. It's the story of hip hop is one of a woman. Let's see. I'll search for it instead. I used to love her. But hip hop, and we'll talk about the sort of, even in his sort of valorization of hip hop and his struggling, one of the things he struggles with is if hip hop is personified as a woman, Common still struggles with her sexual agency, with her ability and willingness to go and be involved with other men. Let's see, we may not be any longer connected. No, it looks like I am. Okay, I gotta re-authenticate. Let's do that. Sorry about this. I normally get much faster reception in most of my my classrooms, and I couldn't hardwire it because this computer doesn't hardwire, and this one doesn't even seem to be working. I was going to try and pull up some stuff on this one so I could work the two at the same time, but it's not even connecting to the network at all. Let me try this again, see. So this is Common personifying hip hop in a female guise, and how he understands it, and how he also tries to sort of struggle in some ways with the idea of female sexual agency, but also as well with the politics of hip hop, the politics and the commercialization of hip hop music. I'll let this spool up a little bit as well. It's a very sort of clever representation, and I'll see what you guys think about if it tells the story accurately.
Yes, yes, y'all, and you don't stop. To the beat, y'all, and you don't stop. Yes, yes, y'all, and you don't stop. 1, 2, y'all, and you don't stop. Yes, yes, y'all, and you don't stop. Until the beat comes, says the beat is short shot. Come on. I left this girl when I was 10 years old. But I love her, she has so much soul. She was old school, but I was just a shorty, never knew. Throughout my life, she would read their phone, be on a regular. Not a church girl, she was secular. Not about the money, those stuff was my checking her, but I respected her. She hit me in the heart. A few New York niggas sat dinner in the park. But she was there for me, and I was there for her. Pull out a chair for her, turn on the air for her, and just cool out and listen to her. Sitting your bone. Wishing that I could do eventually if it was meant to be. And it would be cause we related physically and mentally, cause she was fun then. I be cute when she come around. Slim was fresh, Joe, when she was underground, original, pure on top of the down sister. Who I did it, I miss her. Yes, yes, y'all, and you don't stop. To the beat, y'all, and you don't stop. Yes, yes, y'all, and you don't stop. 1, 2, y'all, and you don't stop. Yes, yes, y'all, and you don't stop. But confidence, y'all, and you don't stop. Yes, yes, y'all, and you don't stop. You act, yo, we gotta be the short shot. Periodically, I would see old girl at the clubs and at the house party. She didn't have a body, but she started getting thick with. Did a couple of videos and became Afro-central. Out goes the weed, in goes the praise bees medallion. She was on that tip about stopping the violence, about my people she was teaching me. By not preaching to me, but speaking to me. And a method that was leisurely, so easily I approach. She dubbed my rap, that's how we got close. But then she broke to the West Coast, and I was cool. Around the same time, I went away to school, and I'm a bad dumb expanded. So why should I stand in her way? She probably get her money in LA, and she did study. She got big bubble, what was foul. She said that the whole black was going out of style. She said Afrocentricity was of the past, but she got into R&B and house, bass and jazz. Now black music, and it's all good. I wasn't salty, she was with the boys in the hood, cause I was new for her. She was becoming well-rounded. I thought it was dope, now she was on that freestyle shit, just having fun. Not worried about anyone, and you can tell by how her titties hung. Yes, yes, y'all, and you don't stop. To the beat, y'all, and you don't stop. Yes, yes, y'all, and you don't stop. 1, 2, y'all, and you don't stop. Yes, yes, y'all, and you don't stop. To the beat, calm down, be the short shot. Yes, yes, y'all, and you don't stop. Get on, check it. I might have felt a mention that this chick was creative. Once the man got to her, he called to the native. Told her if she got an image and a gimmick, then she can make money. And she did it like a dummy. Now I see her in commercials. She's universal. She used to only swing it with the inner city circle. Now she be in the burbs looking rockin', dressing hippie. And on some dumb shit when she comes to the city, talking about popping blocks, serving rocks and hitting switches. Now she's a gangster rolling with gangster bitches. Always smoking blunts and getting drunk, telling me sad stories. Now she only fucks with the funk. Stressing out hardcore and real she is. She was really the realest before she got into showbiz. I did her, not just to say I did it, but I'm committed. But so many niggas hit it that she's just not the same. Letting all these groupies do her. I see niggas swirling her and taking it to the sewer. But I'ma take her back, hoping that this shit stop. Cause who I'm talking about, y'all, is hip-hop. To the beat, y'all, and you don't stop. And yes, yes, y'all, and you don't stop. Man, Frank, yo, they gotta be the short shot. And yes, yes, y'all, and you don't stop. And to the beat, y'all, and you don't stop. And yes, yes, y'all, and you don't stop. But 1, 2, consensus is going to drop.
Yeah, Kenwood Liquors. Harold.
I used to love her, 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 I used to love
her. So what's the story? What's the story here? So what are the transitions that hip hop goes through? Yeah.
Like it begins, like when he talks about like she has so much soul, like it begins like the start of hip hop and how like people were talking about like stuff actually happening in their neighborhood and stuff, and then it's that whole transition like when he's talking about like, oh, she went to the West Coast, he's talking about when West Coast hip hop came up, that whole gangster.
But there's a transition before that, right?
Well, before that he's talking about the he goes into
Right. She taught him about what it meant to be black.
yeah, and then it's like that black power that when that was a part of rap, and I think after that is when she goes to the West Coast. Then she says that like black being trying to act like the Afrocentric is not.
That's not in any longer.
And so now she's like making money like in that whole gangster scene, and then he talks about how like her going like doing so many like doing videos, like and her using her body to do videos, and how that kind of like started her on that whole thing of get money.
Right. So the ultimate problem, in the end, the real alienation comes in sort of somewhere after NWA and the mass commercialization and commodification of hip hop. And hip hop being projected in the suburbs, and at the same time claiming a certain kind of ghetto authenticity, but defining that authenticity through things like Glocks, guns, and those kinds of things. And he says, really, right, that's not the real. Well, the real was where she started off. But hip hop is then a woman in need of redemption, right? And a woman who's attached herself to too many people somewhat indiscriminately, struggling with his inability to control her sexuality. And also, one of the things that's interesting in the song is he expresses the continual metaphor that he uses to use hip hop is through a kind of sexual relationship with some romantic connotations. We could talk about whether it has it or not. It does at least have some sense of some, yeah.
Yeah, it's like when she's saying that she's going over to the West Coast and the whole money thing, he's like almost saying I can understand her attraction to the money. He mentions that.
Right, she'll even get her money in LA, right.
Yeah, and like she's okay, I get that, but that progression.
Yeah, no, and you know, so one of the things that's going on is that, but again, you have a kind of, so him performing hip hop is expressed as a kind of sexual act with hip hop. You know, I used to do her. A lot of homies used to do her in the park, right? And I was wishing I could do her. He's sitting there. Then finally he can, in some sense. And he even talks about her body, etc., how it changes over the course of her expression in hip hop. But one of the points that I think he makes is that the commodification of hip hop, as well as the commodification of women in the context of hip hop, is a kind of inauthentic thing that's imposed upon it, and that hip hop begins to present an inauthentic representation of black communities, meanwhile while claiming authenticity. And he also, again, as was noted, he tracks, he's able to effectively track the use of, in particular, the use of rap in commercials, the growing sort of attraction to rap with suburban white kids, but that rap is engaging in a kind of inauthentic representation of what it means to be a part of the black community, or in particular the hip hop community. Do I want to go into the Dirty South? So, at the same time, another kind of movement, I'll do a little bit of the Dirty South. Another kind of movement in hip hop, I'll sort of finish up here with the Dirty South. So one of the things is, and I think one of the things I want to emphasize is that on one hand, right, hip hop is trying to describe conditions in black communities, make a statement about what it means to be authentically black in America, what that experience is like. And there are competing narratives of that experience. One is a narrative of social protest. Another is a narrative of being involved in sort of gangster life, prison, opposition. Another narrative is pulling oneself up by one's bootstraps. The kind of basic narratives that map onto another narrative is at least somewhat of a suppressed one, is a feminist narrative. Out of Queen Latifah, of the unity of the community comes through resolving these issues of gender relations and moving together in a more positive way. At the same time, there's another narrative that's going on in hip hop that isn't about, and again, one of the ways in which a lot of these discussions play themselves out is that hip hop has always been about sort of the questions of gender and masculinity. And understanding how men express themselves. And in that sense, right, hip hop also has had a kind of flexibility where it begins to pull in other aspects of culture. So we can think about it in the song Dope Man. the line, "Don't get high off your own supply." Where's that from? Oh, come on, Scarface, right? You know, I mean, come on, you guys. Who here hasn't seen Scarface? Wow. That's like, how do you understand hip hop culture post 1985 if you haven't seen, you know, Say Hello to My Little Friend, right? So that's a recommendation. It's actually a horrible film. Well, no, actually, I mean, in some ways, sort of brilliant in a different kind of way, but interesting performance by Al Pacino. But Scarface, you know, is a kind of fundamental sort of touchstone, right? The lines from Scarface appear in all kinds of hip hop culture, including one of the rappers from the Ghetto Boys called himself Scarface. At the same time, rap begins to pick up other parts and sort of evolution of culture, in particular the gender narrative within hip hop becomes a kind of important and essential, is always a kind of an essential part of what's going on. And one of the things that hip hop begins to pick up on in that, so if we think about where is one of the at least legitimate spaces where the commodification of sexual relationships is a legitimate set of exchanges? The strip club, right? So, and in some ways, pornography. I'm not going to show you guys 2 Live Crew, "Oh Me So Horny." It's actually horrible rap. But in some ways, right, the actual culture of the strip club ends up becoming the kind of ultimate expression of bling bling hip hop, as well as gender relations, right? The idea that the relationships between men and women are entirely commodified. There's nothing romantic about it. The women aren't there because they love the men. Why are they there? They get money. The guys want to express their power and wealth through spending it, right? That's how you demonstrate your power and wealth, is through spending money. And so the set of relations that define the black community, and in particular black men and women, are then reduced to women as objects, right, bought and sold, and expressing their agency through how they can get money from men. And then on the flip side, men, the way that they demonstrate their power and wealth is through splashing the cash and quote unquote buying women. And hence I'm going to give you guys one of the more controversial videos that is sort of, I would argue, is the pinnacle of this kind of representation, as well as it got Nelly banned from being able to perform at Spelman College. This is the song and video associated with Tip Drill. Oh no, they got rid. Oh yeah, I have to. Okay, so adult warning. And this is, in some ways, it's also a combination of the culture of pornography. So one of the things that's actually going on in this video is, in what genre do you see the hand cam sort of following somebody around? Not documentary. Another genre that's much more closer to this video. It's gonzo pornography, right? Where the performers are actually the people making, you know, the porn. So now hip hop hasn't sort of assimilated, right? In the terms of the sets of gender relations, hip hop has now assimilated the kind of culture and inflection of various kinds of pornography into it. And many people even argued that previous forms of hip hop were kind of ghetto pornography, right? You got to see a set of violence and a set of relationships without any of the consequences, without any, right? So we don't see, in pornography, we don't see the consequences of sexual activity. It's also It's also in a sort of hyperbolic form, right? It doesn't look the way it does in real life. And in some ways we get this here. And so you can see even some of the things, but notice here what the sort of basis of the relationship is, and it's now entirely defined by a material exchange.
Word I meet, not without what my name is. It ain't going down like that. I'm finna go up here, look, oh shit, look, I hope ain't nobody here under indictment, married, or got something to lose. Cause I'm coming in with the camera. Let's go. Yo, this is for my nigga, DJ 618. Oh. Your face, I need a tip drill. I need a tip drill. I said it must be your ass, cause it ain't your face. I need a tip drill. I need a tip drill. See, this is a tip drill. Point out, where she at? Point out, where she at? Point out, there she goes. See, this is a tip drill. Point out, where she at? Point out, where she at? Point out, there she goes. We got money in her collar, we don't give a fuck. Looking for a tip drill. I mean a tip drill. We throwing money in her collar, we don't give a fuck. Looking for a tip drill. I mean a tip drill.
the moment that attracted the most controversy, when he runs his Platinum American Express card through the buttocks of the woman. So here we see.
That was just too much booty.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the.
That was like already 46.
Yeah, and that becomes the most offensive moment. But we now see, like, how far have we come from the message, right? In terms of expressing, we're in a different world, and even in terms of expressing kind of a party sensibility. And again, even here, what is the women's goal? Because they actually speak up in the video. They say that. Go ahead.
Wasn't there another part where they were they were actually in a strip club?
No. This is the house. You know, there's a pole in the basement, so to speak. This is a sort of. I don't know what Janet Jackson was letting Jermaine Dupri show up in here, but whatever. But one of the things that's also going on is that also look, and how far are we away from kind of the politics of respectability, right? A kind of sense from black nationalists or black conservatives that you ought to comport yourself a certain way. And in fact, even in this context, right, lesbian sexuality is okay if, to titillate men, right? Only in that context, right? Like if they want to go off to be with each other on their own, it's maybe not okay. But if it's designed to titillate men, then it's okay. And so you can see actually as well a kind of change in mores, but in particular the kind of the projection of the culture of the strip club and pornography. But essentially, what's overlying it is the commodification of relationships between men and women, and the suppression of a kind of a feminist sensibility, or a radically departure, right? And here, the sensibility through which women express agency is by taking money off men, not by developing articulate success in their own way, not by becoming rappers on their own, or doing their own thing. It's by getting them to pay their bills or buy them a car. But at the same time, right, they aren't, to them, what is Nelly to them? He's just a trick, right? He's just, he has no inherent value. He's not because he's cool, because he's good looking, because he's anything. It's just, he's just has money. He's just another trick. And so, again, this is a kind of reduction of male and female relationships to commodity, and a part of the kind of coarsening of the culture around gender in black communities and discussions. But all in all, coming out of the ongoing and the continued sort of struggle, and in particular the imposition of a masculine gaze in the context of hip hop. And so if I had to leave you with anything, hip hop is all about gender and masculinity, yeah.
Where do you put where would you put Tupac? Because he did kind of all of it.
He did all of it. But then at the same time, right, Tupac sort of articulates, sometimes occasionally, like in Dear Mama, sort of, captures a kind of sense of, tries to struggle himself with his mother's sexual agency as a single mom. And so it is entirely much more, obviously anything is much more thoughtful than Tip Drill. But Tupac tries to move back and forth between the elements of hip hop, and in fact, in some ways in himself is kind of a struggle as represented by the struggle within the Black Panther Party, between in some ways, the kind of gangster elements that sort of, in some ways, brought down some of the downfall of the Black Panther Party. But then Tupac also represents some of its consciousness, having his mom been a member of the party herself, but who later on sort of succumbed to those elements and becoming addicted to crack cocaine, etc. So in some ways, Tupac himself kind of embodies all of the elements. Tupac himself was once even arrested for sexual assault, was involved in shootings with police, was himself violently killed, unfortunately. And I'll sort of leave you in reference to kind of Tupac. So I'm gonna quote Marx in order to draw a bridge between Tupac and the Black Panther Party in terms of the sort of consciousness of it being brought down by its kind of gangster elements and its kind of loss of control. Marx, in the beginning of the 18th century, Brumaire states history always repeats itself. The first time is tragedy, the second time is farce. Okay, see you guys on Tuesday.